Welcome back to the Taproom Exclusive. I am here with Vaughn Stewart at Bookhouse Brewing. We have moved on to the gose. Did I pronounce it right? There's like 30 different ways I've heard it pronounced.
Yeah. The easiest way that I've seen it kind of explained is gose, and you can kind of think of it as like in a phonetic spelling of like GOES, like goes, like goes somewhere, and then hyphen AH.
Okay.
So gose.
Gose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a strange old German word,
right.
So there's lots of room for interpretation. And
so we were talking a little bit off air about the style. It's still the sour category in general is something I'm still getting. I'm new to, and so I'm still exploring a lot of. For people who don't know goses and sours, kind of what is it, and kind of how does it separate from the rest of the sour category? Sure.
So traditionally, gose would have been made in and around Leipzig, Germany, which is northern Germany. There's some kind of confusion of the kind of etymology revolving around the Goslar River. But the short version is that it's an old German style of beer that is sour, slightly salty, and has a hint of coriander. That's really kind of the quick version. It's also a wheat beer, so it's very comparable to like a Berliner Weiss style ale, but with that addition of the hint of salinity and the little bit of coriander. Really, the spice use and things like that, I mean, that's a very old brewing tradition thing. You see that in wit beer and in all kinds of old styles that you can really trace back to. A lot of it was kind of superstition. It was that spices were used instead of hops or all sorts of other reasons. So the acidity traditionally comes from a lactobacillus bacteria.
Okay.
Which is, again, similar to Berliner Weiss. It's an important distinction because in the cases of a lot of the Belgian sour beers, the traditional lambics and gose and things like that, and Oudbrunn, the acidity would come from a combination of lactobacillus and pediococcus, and as well as, in some cases, some kind of secondary metabolites from Brettanomyces.
Okay.
There's an argument to be made that traditional Berliner Weiss has a little bit of Brettanomyces character, but it's usually not done nowadays. But in any case, so it's a distinction in that the acidity of lactobacillus is very clean and sharp and concise.
Okay.
It's like a German Pilsner. All the edges are very square and even, right? There's no kind of room for sloppiness. It's the acidity of yogurt. It's the acidity of sauerkraut. It's these very, distinct, clean, lemony kind of things. And so in any case, our interpretation of it, I mean, I make it pretty similarly to how a lot of breweries are making gose nowadays, which is to, make the wort, do the mash, normal kinds of brewing things. And then I send it to my kettle and just kind of pasteurize it briefly. And then send it to a fermenter, and in the fermenter I add a pure lactobacillus culture. Some breweries will leave it in the kettle and just cool it down and put the lactobacillus in there. There's technical reasons about why I don't do it that way, but in any case, it stays in the fermenter for about 48 hours and fully acidifies, and then I send it back to the kettle and boil it fully.
Okay.
And so that does a couple things. One, it makes it into just a more standard brewing process thing. It also fixes the acidity at a certain point and kills the lactobacillus bacteria.
Okay.
And then we clean the fermenter that it was in and send it back in there and ferment normally, just like any other beer. And so the result you get is, again, a pretty predictable acidity that's at a fixed point. It's microbiologically stable because it's just traditional yeast that's in there. So there's there's always something of a risk, but there's a very low risk of unintentional infection or things like that.
That it seems like it's a style that you really have to be on your game about with sours overall. I mean, with any beer, but it seems like the technical aspects behind it are pretty. You got to be pretty pinpoint.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit more involved. I think there are people who definitely make them in a much more freewheeling kind of farmhouse brewing way, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I'm not trying to throw shade on that, but it's the method that works for me.
Yeah.
I like that it produces pretty predictable results. If you kind of look at your set of variables and say, if as long as all these conditions are the same, I should be in good shape to make something reliable.
Right.
And and it also, it avoids, because we use a pure isolated lactobacillus culture, it avoids off flavors like Band-Aid and Parmesan cheese and feet and stuff like that are not very good.
That's always that was always one of the, when you said Band-Aid, I've heard that, like, people talk about that term used to describe all flavors and everything. It just automatically just makes me ugh.
Yeah.
That is just but what in your opinion, the sours kind of came up. It didn't come out of nowhere. They've been slowly building for a while, but where do you see this kind of resurgence of popularity in them? Is it just everything's cyclical?
It's hard to say, and I think it depends kind of on what data you look at and how you kind of categorize different types of sour beer. I think that the percentage of sales that sour beers make up is still pretty small in the grand scheme of things. It's definitely increasing. It's definitely growing. But I think it still does just kind of pose a challenge to just a lot of beer drinkers. And I think that's okay. I think a lot of where the ground to be made in the growth of sour beer is in bringing in wine drinkers and cider drinkers and people who are used to really a fairly decent bit of acidity, because a lot of wines are quite a bit more acidic than beer, and so they can kind of bridge that gap, especially the more traditional aged sour ales of Belgium. I think a lot of the resurgence, part of it is that brewers finally got comfortable with the idea of making sour beer on an American schedule, which is to say quickly.
Yeah.
And so, there are problems, there are fits and starts, and there's growth to be figured out and things like that. But I think that's part of it is that brewers and accordingly the people they sell the beer to have kind of gotten used to and interested in those different production techniques, because really a lot of so what I'm in more detail, kind of what I'm talking about with the method there is, for me to make a batch of gose, it's about a 10, maybe 12 day turnaround,
okay,
which is pretty fast.
Yeah.
Where traditionally a Belgian style sour beer, your Lambics, your Gose, your Oud Bruin, Flanders Red, those are 1 to 3 years or more.
Wow.
Of time. And a lot of that's tradition and choice and things like that. But it's the way that those breweries and those brewers have made beers for hundreds of years. So they don't have a lot of incentive to really change that. But yeah, I think that it's an evolving segment. It's still pretty small. In terms of where the interest comes from, it's like a lot of things in craft beer. I think you can trace it to an interest in local agriculture, the kind of locavore movement thing, anything in that grouping of food e-culture, slow food, these kinds of things that, the values of different generations and of people who are discovering things and trying new things. I don't know. There's just a combination of a lot of things, I think, that have influenced that rise.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool thing to see. It's something different for people to try and expand your palate. Don't be afraid to try something new and just keep finding it, because I tell this with people who don't like IPAs. Like, maybe you don't like a certain hop,
right?
Find something that you like. You can find it, and I have gotten people who swore off IPAs into that, and then I've turned people who don't like sours into sours.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point to mention, though, too, is definitely, I think, be willing to try it, but the flip side of that I would add is be willing to say to the brewer, the bartender, whatever, I don't like this because, and B, I mean, it's a tough ask because, you want to meet people where they are, and you don't want to place all the burden on them to communicate, this is bad because, but like if you taste a beer and it, for instance, tastes like dirty gym socks or something like that, that's not supposed to be that way.
Right.
It's okay to speak up and say, yeah, and it's okay to speak up and say, this is not good. And yeah, exactly. When that feedback loop is robust, coming from the person drinking it to the brewer, to the distributor, whatever, that's where the growth is going to happen, because that's where the bad beer, the bad batches, the bad techniques are going to be ironed out.
Right.
And where essentially in economic terms, the market will push out the bad. Right. But if and I know it's a big ask, and I'm not saying everyone has to do it all the time and be super critical beer judges, but like bad beer is bad.
Yeah.
so pass that along, because brewers want to know when you have a bad beer.
Yeah, you don't want your name out there associated with a bad beer.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So going into yours a little bit, you guys, you have is it like a base now? You mentioned you were kind of doing like a one-off or something, like a variant. Go on a little bit about what that is and how it differs from the base.
Yeah, I mean, so basically this week I have a batch of key lime version of the gose, of the 3 out of 5 gose, and it came about from just a couple times kind of experimenting with one-off kegs of take a keg of the base gose and add a whole bunch of like mango puree or something like that, and just kind of little experiments like that. Those kegs did pretty well, and I think fruit and acidity are natural companions, and it was really just kind of, I was browsing ingredients and seeing what was available, and I found a good source for key lime juice, puree, whatever you want to call it, and just thought that there's a natural kind of pairing there of the key lime and the gose. So so we're doing a key lime version of the 3 out of 5 gose. The one tricky thing there is I put 88 pounds of key lime juice puree into about 100 gallons of base gose, and it really brought the pH down quite a lot. Normally we're shooting for like a 3.2 to 3.4 pH at serving. This batch was down at 2.7.
Oh, wow.
And anyone who knows, pH it's a logarithmic scale, so that's quite acidic. So in any case, I had intended to have this batch be half key lime and half just traditional gose, but I'm actually going to be blending those together to kind of get to a happy middle ground.
Okay.
But yeah, so in any case, it's very good, and it's like you can really taste that just like huge key lime, distinct kind of blast of flavor. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I like key lime. I like the flavor, and I think in that, like you were saying, that it'll play well. The citrus of it, the acidity, and will just play very well with the style.
Yeah,
that's gonna be fun, and that's kind of the, like you were saying with doing different, like how did the mango vary from the key lime? Like how does those kind of differentiate in using the same base with it?
I like the mango especially. That was just kind of one example. I've done passion fruit and caruba and some other funky fruits. But I like the mango because it really kind of, with the salinity in there, it pushes in the direction of like a mango lassi, an Indian drink that has a little bit of salt in there, and it's very cooling and refreshing.
Yeah,
they're very compatible flavors. It's really, it's like anything in brewing, I guess. It's you kind of experiment and you try different things, and when you kind of land on something good, you just run with it, and hope that people feel the same way.
Well, that's a fun series to kind of focus on, is just doing different fruits in the same beer and seeing how it changes that same beer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. At the same time, though, I'll be quick to say that, like, I don't think that I like doing the variations, but I also personally have a lot of faith just in a traditional Leipziger Gose.
Right.
I think it can stand on its own without the fruit, But it is fun to do the variations too. I don't know. I
just to
can
see.
kind of have it both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's what being the brewer is all about.
Right.
You do get to get it both ways.
Yeah.
So you can have it however you want. You're making it. Anything else about the style or yours specifically that you want to get out? Pairing if you wanted to eat with it or anything.
Oh yeah, I mean it's definitely a pretty food friendly beer. I'm trying to think of. I mean, generally with a style like that, you look at chicken, fish, lobster is great with it. It works well with cream-based sauces as well, where it really kind of cuts through the richness of the sauce. But goat cheese, they're complementary and kind of create an enhancing element. But
That's been fun to do too. Is beer and cheese comboing those, seeing what works well with what. Vaughn, thank you so much again for your time. Tune in next week for another episode here at Bookhouse.